Welcome to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. I am Adam Rank. This is Kimmy Checks. This is Marcus Grant. And Kimmy, how you living today?
I'm feeling good. We got week 2 of NFL games, an exciting slate of games coming up this morning, this afternoon, and tonight since we're here on the LA side. You know, after week 1, it was kind of a pinch me moment. It was like, holy cow, football's back. And then you wake up and you realize this is not a dream. 2020 has not punked us yet again. Football is here to stay. So I'm excited. I'm feeling good.
Well, here's the thing. Week 1 always sort of punks us because we overreact in one direction, and then things happen in week 2 and we overreact in the other direction. So not that I'm trying to fast forward through this season, but it's when we get to week 3 and 4 that we finally sort of stabilize and figure out we have some semblance of what we're talking about.
Now, we want to hear from you on the social media channels. You can hit us up on Twitter at NFL Fantasy, or if you're watching the show on YouTube, first of all, thank you so much for doing that. But we have Michael F. Florio in the chat function on YouTube. He is answering every single question, or at least he's going to be trying to, because that's what he does. He's diligent. He's trying to help you out. And plus, you can check out the rankings page as well if you do not get an answer from us directly. Now, week 2, it's time to bring a little bit of the heat. We got some hot takes coming. And Kimmy, I'm going to lead off with you.
All right, so this one's hot, but it's actually not that spicy if you look at history. My hot take for this week is that Josh Allen is going to be the top scoring fantasy quarterback. He's going up against the Miami Dolphins today, but I just want to, there's an important note. There's a reason why I'm saying this. Josh Allen averages over 31 fantasy points per game versus the Miami Dolphins, which is the most by any player in NFL history, right? He has played the Dolphins 4 times in his career. Do you want to know how he finished as a fantasy quarterback? He finished as QB number 1 twice, QB number 2 once, and QB number 7. So every single time he's gone up against the Miami Dolphins, the lowest he's ever been is a QB 7, right? So today he's going to play him. He's going to finish as QB numero uno. And once he does it, you can tweet me and tell me how great I am.
No, that's a hot take. That was, obviously the Bills fans like to jump through tables. I think that was a Sabu lighting the table on fire in ECW and going through it. So that was pretty good. Marcus, can you top that?
Well, I'm going to go, look, I know when it comes to fantasy football, we look at Jared Cook sort of working on Saturdays. Yeah, it seems like a good idea, but it's better if somebody else handles it. But this week, you're going to want Jared Cook on your roster. Look, part of it is that he will be the top scoring tight end of the week, partially because there is no George Kittle this week. We know that he is out with an injury. But the other part is he's got a good matchup against the Raiders, who've struggled against tight ends over the last couple of years. With no Michael Thomas, I expect him to get another heavy target share like we saw last week. He got more, or just about half of the team's air yards. I think you're going to see something close to that this week. So they're going to lean on him very heavily in that Monday night game against the Raiders. And I think he's going to get you 20-plus points this week.
For the record, I love working on Saturdays. You can check me out on Good Morning Football Weekend. This week I was dressed up as Johnny Lawrence and Bodie from Point Break. So I think Saturdays are kind of cool to work. But my hot take is going to be that the 3 primary receivers for the Dallas Cowboys are going to have 100 receiving yards this week against that Atlanta Falcons secondary that has struggled for quite some time. Not only do they struggle, the Falcons really have a problem getting to the quarterback. We did see Aaron Donald able to harangue Dak Prescott a little bit last week, but I don't think that's going to be a problem. They're going to be able to spread the ball out. They're going to be able to throw it. I know, like Marcus said, a lot of people overreact to week 1. I was watching Game Day earlier, and everybody's freaking out about the Dallas Cowboys. You shouldn't. They're going to have a lot of production this week, so feel comfortable going with them. All right, now we need to take a look at some of the notable injuries heading into week 2. James Conner is going to be active this afternoon. We'll circle back to that in a moment, and a couple other prominent players who will be active. Devontae Parker, Cortland Sutton, active. Bad news, Phillip Lindsay is not only inactive, he is expected to miss a couple of weeks. A.J. Brown is out. Chris Godwin is not going to be playing, nor is Kenny Golladay. And the big one, George Kittle, which is going to be a subject we will tackle here in just a moment. But I want to go back to that Buccaneers game. Now, their wide receivers have been on the injury list for the past couple of weeks. So, Kimmy, I want to lead off with you. If you have Mike Evans, Scotty Miller, which player do you think is going to be the better play this week?
You know, even though Mike Evans is coming off of an injury, I do think that it's going to be him today. The Panthers don't have that good of a secondary. So though he is coming off of the injury report, I think you should fire him up in your lineup. Tom Brady is looking to get revenge after their loss against the Saints last week. You know, the problem with New England when he was a Patriot is that he did not have those star receivers, right? He had Julian Edelman, but then there was some trouble there. Him becoming a Buccaneer, he was really excited about this receiving core. Though I do think Scotty Miller will have some opportunities, Mike Evans is going to be his wide receiver one.
Absolutely. I think this is a bounce back week for Mike Evans. He's gotten healthier. He's had more time to work with Tom Brady in practice. I think without Chris Godwin, they're going to lean on him in the passing game. So I do think he's the guy that scores more points. But I don't think you can completely discount Scotty Miller and what he means in this Buccaneers offense. I mean, we saw last week he got a lot of looks from Tom Brady. They seem to have a pretty good connection going. And now, without Chris Godwin, I expect Miller moves inside to the slot where we know Brady likes to target a lot of receivers. Justin Watson takes over on the outside. So, you know, combined with the fact that they seem to have a good connection last week, being in a spot where Brady likes to throw the football, I do think Miller has a pretty good day, but I don't think he outscores Mike Evans.
Yeah, I really do believe that obviously Mike Evans is a good one, but Scotty Miller was somebody who was available on the waiver wire, and I think if you look him in context with like Emmanuel Sanders, who was also on the waiver wire this week, I would still have Emmanuel Sanders up, but Scotty Miller's still a pretty good play. What about the Steelers backfield situation? Kimmy, I'm going to go back to you. I want to ask Benny Snell or James Conner in week 2.
Now, I'm going to give my answer, and I'm kind of upset about it because I have a ton of shares in James Conner. There was a lot of hype during the preseason, so I picked him up in some of my leagues, but I'm actually going to shy away from him and instead go to Benny Snell. Now, his week 1 performance showed me that he has the opportunity to be Mike Tomlin's running back, right? He had 113 yards on 19 carries and seems to be the workhorse back of that offense. So though I do like James Conner and I don't want to discount him because we have such a small sample size and he was dealing with an injury, I do think Benny Snell has stepped up and is going to prove to be dominant in that offense.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that. I'm going to double down on Snell here. Just watching last week, and admittedly, Conner didn't get a ton of opportunities because he got hurt fairly early in that game, but Snell just looked more efficient with the ball in his hand. He was sort of more one cut and go, where Conner kind of just was not quite up the field, downhill, I guess, as they say, running the football. And now there's talk that Snell's going to start to get more opportunities, even with Conner healthy and on the field. So I think I would give him the shot this week as a flex play.
Yeah, it seemed coming into the year that they were going to try to take a little bit of the workload away from James Conner, trying to, just preserve him for the entirety of the season. And at the tight end position, again, going back, George Kittle, this was a devastating, it's devastating to fantasy enthusiasts and 49er fans alike. But what do we do about that this week? Marcus, who are we picking up to plug into our lineup with George Kittle out?
I think Logan Thomas is a nice play. I mean, it's week 2, right? We're already talking about streaming tight ends and trying to find guys off the waiver wire. But Logan Thomas was a nice part of what Washington did last week in their comeback win over Philadelphia. And I think we've sort of forgotten about him. I mean, maybe because it's been a while since the FT has had a notable tight end, but you see all the targets that he got there last week. And if you're looking for somebody, I think he's a good plug-in. Plus, the Cardinals historically have not been good at covering the tight end position, so this seems like a pretty good matchup.
I love that, and I think if you're not able to get Logan Thomas off the waiver wire, another guy that you could look to target is Kyle Rudolph for the Vikings. Now, he's not going to make that big of a fantasy impact right from the jump, but if you're desperate for a tight end because George Kittle's out, or you had Blake Jarwin and Blake Jarwin was out, or we told you to go get another guy and then he went to go get injured because tight ends are falling, Kyle Rudolph could be someone who you can look. Now, he caught both of his targets for 28 yards, and the Vikings lost to the Packers last Sunday, but a reason why I think Rudolph could be a good play is because Stephon Diggs is no longer there. We saw Adam Thielen step up in week 1. If defenses are now paying attention to that and we see Adam Thielen start to get double teamed, they're going to need some help on the receiving side of the ball, which is why I think Kyle Rudolph could step up as a tight end 1.
I have a roster with both Blake Jarwin and George Kittle, so I'm really glad you said that because I picked up Kyle Rudolph to put him in play this week.
I have shares of both of those players moving forward. Time now for 15 for 15, presented by Geico. We're going to be dishing out our top 15 starts for the week and even more. And let's take a look at our stardom quarterback board. Of course, I am now penning the Stardom Situm article for NFL.com, and these are my top 5, or my 5 starts for this week. Cam Newton, Dak Prescott, Josh Allen, Kimmy checks. You know, I took a cue from you. Phillip Rivers, I'm a big proponent of Phillip Rivers this week. Tom Brady against the Carolina Panthers. So, Marcus, which one of these quarterbacks, or you know what, you can go off the menu. This is like In-N-Out. You can go off the menu if you would like. Who stands out to you?
No, I think I'm gonna order off the Big Denny's placard this week, and I'm gonna say it's Tom Brady. Look, last week was not a great week for him against the Saints. Some of that had to do with the fact that he was playing a pretty good defense in New Orleans. I think this is a bounce-back week. You've heard all week long about how Tom Brady just rarely struggles in back-to-back games. I do think some of that is true. I think he's going to want to go out and prove to everybody that he's not washed. And it helps that he's got a Panthers defense that is still trying to find itself in the secondary. So I do think you're going to see Tom Brady bounce back, and everybody's going to say for at least 1 week that, hey, maybe Tom's not washed yet, and we can still trust him in fantasy.
Okay, I love that. But Rank, how did you not have Aaron Rodgers on your board? Do you not remember what he did in week 1? I know he's not a Chicago Bear. He's your enemy who's a Packer. But guys, Aaron Rodgers, 364 passing yards, 4 touchdowns versus the Vikings in week 1. Now, the Detroit Lions last week allowed 25 fantasy points to Mitch Trubisky. Aaron Rodgers is a lot better of a quarterback than Mitch Trubisky. So Aaron Rodgers is that QB who I think is a must start. He's going to have another dominant week. What's going on here, guys?
Yeah, that's debatable on who's better between Rodgers or Trubisky. But no, obviously I like Rodgers as well. So I can't give him too much credit. I called that during the preseason. Like, I was the only one in week 1, it felt like, who was saying, like, we should probably start this guy. But you know what? He is still a great start. But let's turn to the running back positions. If we could take a look. Thank you so much. Jonathan Taylor, Austin Eckler, Adrian Peterson, David Johnson, James Robinson. Austin Eckler, I feel like I had to put here, because too many people were freaking out about him. But Kimmy, let's lead off with you. Is there a running back who is not listed here you might want to mention?
I'm going off menu again, and it's a guy that I have hyped all preseason. It's Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I love that we now have made Clyde Edwards-Helaire a song, a Prince song at that. Shout out to me for being a millennial and knowing that. But Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the Chiefs are going up against the Chargers, which historically is a really tough matchup for the Kansas City Chiefs. But if anybody is going to be able to break that curse, it's going to be Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He was the only running back who rushed for over 100 yards in week 1. He's going to do it again. Now, the last time that the Chargers played the Chiefs, Damian Williams, who was opted out of this 2020 season over concerns of COVID-19, he had 31.4 fantasy points. That was in week 17 of 2019. With him out and Clyde taking that #1 running back role, I think he's going to have a dominant game and break the curse of the Chargers and the Chiefs.
Yeah, I mean, CEH just seems poised to have big weeks week after week. I'm going with Alvin Kamara. I talked a little bit about Jared Cook at the start of the show and how much they're going to lean on him. I think they're also going to put a little bit of an extra workload on Kamara. We're going to see him get maybe a few more targets than he would in a normal game, but he also has a really good matchup, right? He's facing the Raiders this week. The Raiders certainly had their problems with Christian McCaffrey, so now they've got to deal with another star, multi-talented, multi-dimensional running back this week in Alvin Kamara. So I think this is a week that he has another solid outing and helps you out. Makes you feel good that you spent probably a top 3 or 4 pick on him.
And I will point out that Kimmy Checks, well ahead of the curve, took Clyde Edwards-Helaire in the first round of one of our fantasy mock drafts. She was mocked. Who's laughing now? But let's take a look at our starting wide receivers. Allen Robinson leads this list along with Adam Thielen, John Brown, Will Fuller. I know that's a tough matchup this week against the Baltimore Ravens, but I am undaunted, and I've got Cooper Kupp on my list. But Marcus, who are you going with?
Well, first off, I do like that you're reinforcing Will Fuller because I'm totally down with that. But I'm looking at Amari Cooper in what I think is going to be a high-scoring game against the Atlanta Falcons. We thought last week that maybe Cooper would have a tough time against that Rams secondary, especially if he had to line up against Jalen Ramsey. And that really wasn't the case. Had a very nice week in week 1. The Falcons don't have anyone in their secondary on par with Ramsey. We saw them get lit up last week by the Seahawks duo of DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. So, I mean, I like all of the Cowboys receivers this week, but I especially like Amari Cooper.
I love that. It seems like you're in agreement that the wide receivers for the Cowboys are going to light it up. Earlier, Rank said that 3 of those receivers are going to have 100-plus yard games. But Rank, on your board, you mentioned John Brown, but I want to talk about another guy on that team. It's Stephon Diggs. I talked about him no longer being a Minnesota Viking and stepping it up for the Bills. Earlier, I said that Josh Allen is going to be the #1 fantasy quarterback this week. That means he needs to throw the ball to someone, and it's going to be Stephon Diggs. He had 9 targets, 8 receptions, and 86 yards versus the Jets in week 1. John Brown has kind of been dealing with a foot injury, so I do think that Stephon Diggs has an opportunity. Earlier this week on Fantasy Live, Adam Rank and I talked about our stacks on stacks, the best quarterback and wide receiver stacks of the week, and this was actually one I said it was going to be Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs. So I'm sticking to my guns here and do think that this could be a dominant performance for him, even though Josh Allen has struggled with some deep balls.
No, for sure. And I like that Cowboy stack too. So going back to Marcus's point about Amari Cooper. So I think those are some pretty good stacks. And that was 15 for 15 presented by Geico. Now, if you're looking for your opponent's kryptonite, you have come to the right place. Yep, in a world. Now, we've got a list of week 2 fantasy heroes that'll have your lineups soaring this week. And there he is, Saquon Barkley. Not only is he going up against my Chicago Bears, I've got to face him in one of my leagues, and I don't feel great about it. Like, this is going to be the game that he breaks out, of course. Even though the Bears have Bobby Quinn back, but still. NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico rolls on. And there, walking onto the field, is Miles Sanders. Last week, did not play in week 1. We all scrambled for Boston Scott. You all got mad at us for telling you to start him. But this week, Miles Sanders with a pretty good matchup against the LA Rams. So make sure you get him into your lineup. And welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. And as always, we love to hear from you. So if you want to tweet us a question at NFL Fantasy, it might just wind up here on the show. And I do believe we're going to run a couple of tweets here. By the way, Michael F. Florio is on our YouTube channel answering as many questions as humanly possible in that chat function. We're wearing them out before we got to bring them onto the show. But let's take a look at some of the fan questions that you sent us via Twitter. And Diggs or Metcalf? Kimmy, which way you leaning?
Ooh, Stephon Diggs or DK Metcalf? I'm going to go with DK.
Marcus, do you agree?
I probably would lean Diggs. I mean, she just gave Diggs a whole bunch of hype. I think I'm gonna go with that one.
Right.
I know.
All right.
But Metcalf also has a good matchup. Come on, guys.
All right, you're good. You're good. JV, Melvin Gordon or Naheem Hines? Marcus.
I'm going to lean Gordon, mostly based on volume here. The matchup's not great against the Steelers, but with no Phillip Lindsay, I think he gets more work. Naheem Hines is going to have to share, probably take a back seat to Jonathan Taylor.
And one more. Jay wants to know Hawkinson or Henry at tight end. Kimmy, which way you leaning?
I'm actually going to lean TJ Hawkinson. I know that we kind of roasted him last season because he had a breakout performance in week 1, and then he kind of fell off the board. He again had a breakout performance in week 1, but I do think it's going to stick this time. So TJ Hawkinson, let's go.
Yeah, I did. Do we have one more, Hytham? Nope, that was it. All right, now time for Fantasy Heroes. And listen, we're not looking for the superstars. We're not looking at Superman, Batman. We're looking for the auxiliary players. We're looking for a Jason Todd, a Damian Wayne, one of the sidekicks who can help win you a week this here in week 2. So Marcus, let's start with you. Who is a guy who can help lift your team to victory? Come through and save the day, if you will.
I'm going to say Ronald Jones. I mean, and I guess in terms of Pirates, he's a swashbuckler. I don't know any pirate sidekicks except Mr. Smee, and he wasn't all that heroic.
What about the parrot?
Sure, that works too. Anyway, the Rojo slander has gone far enough as far as I'm concerned. He played very well in week 1 against the Saints. Now he gets an even better matchup against the Panthers. They were shredded by Josh Jacobs in the Raider running game in week 1. I do think Leonard Fournette gets a slightly bigger load this week, but Bruce Arians wasn't lying to us when he said that Ronald Jones is still the guy. He looks bulked up. He's kind of shades of LeGarrette Blount down there in Tampa Bay. I think he comes through in a big way this week for you.
I love it. Now, another guy who I think is going to come through really big, and he's not playing today, but he will be playing in the very first ever football game in Las Vegas. It is Emmanuel Sanders. Now, the news broke after last Sunday's game when Michael Thomas kind of didn't really play that much and have a lot of targets that he was actually dealing with a high ankle sprain. He is out for tomorrow's contest, which means that Emmanuel Sanders is going to step up as the number 1 wide receiver for that Drew Brees-led offense. He had 5 targets, 3 receptions, 15 yards, and a touchdown against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in week 1, where the Saints won. Now, we forget that Emmanuel Sanders, people used to fight over getting him on their rosters when he played for the Denver Broncos. He is still a talented wide receiver. He's going to step up this week and lead you to victory.
I really want to start him over David Johnson in a flex spot in one of my leagues. I'm itching to do it. And in that same league, somebody released Michael Gallup. And this league, listen, I'm just going to put it out there. They're a bunch of noobs, and they don't necessarily make great roster decisions. And normally if somebody gets released in the secondary waiver wire, that I can go through and scoop them up. But I was spelled this week by my kryptonite. Jason, how dare you? But anyways, I love Michael Gallup. I know that was a huge story for this. I like Michael Gallup to bounce back. As Marcus said at the top of the show, people are overreacting way too much to what happened in week 1. He is going to be just fine, and he should help lead your team to victory.
I'm also going to go with Marquise Hollywood Brown this week against the Houston Texans. He looked pretty good last week, and I think the biggest thing is it looks like he is fully healthy after he dealt with that foot issue for most of last year. He also has a very good matchup against that Houston Texans secondary. We saw them get torched quite a bit by the Chiefs in week 1. We know Lamar Jackson loves to hit Brown downfield. So even if he doesn't get a ton of targets, he's the sort of player that only needs 1 or 2 big plays with the ball in his hands to have a pretty good fantasy week, and I think it happens on Sunday.
Anytime in the 3rd round during the NFL fantasy draft season this year, I was kind of like Darth Vader, conflicted at the end of Return of the Jedi, trying to figure out, do I want Cooper Kupp? Do I want Bobby Trees? So I split the difference. But Kimmy, which one of those wide receivers would you want to go with today?
I'm going to go with the wide receiver who just got paid. It's Bobby Trees. And Rank, you should know this. You were one of the people hyping him up all offseason and even in week 1. Now, Woods outscored Cooper Kupp by almost 10 fantasy points in that. What did they win? Yeah, in the win against the Dallas Cowboys. 8 targets, 6 receptions, 105 receiving yards. He led all of the team for that game, but also since 2019, he leads the team in targets and yards. 147 targets, 1,239 yards. Look at the numbers. It's Robert Woods. That's no slander against Cooper Kupp. I also think he's incredible. But Robert Woods, he's going to take home the cake and be the number 1 receiving scorer for this week.
I think it's going to be Cup this week, and I love Robert Woods too. I've been big on the Bobby Trees train for a while, but I think this is the week they want to get Cup going just because last week wasn't particularly great. I do see this as being more of a pass-heavy game for the Rams. I thought last week the matchup just sort of worked well for them to run the football, and Malcolm Brown was playing well, so why not keep giving him the ball? But I think they want to get Jared Goff going a little bit more. I think they'll put the ball in his hands, and I think he'll go to his guy, his favorite target, his security blanket, Cooper Kupp. I think Woods certainly has his numbers today, but I think this is a week they want to kind of get him going. I think they also want to get Tyler Higbee going a little bit as well, too.
Cooper Kupp became incredibly touchdown dependent at the end of last season. The Eagles gave up 21 touchdowns to wide receivers last year in 2019, which was the third highest total. Just something to think about. Now, in Baltimore, it seems like J.K. Dobbins it's only a matter of time before he ends up taking over that role. And so who are we going with? Marcus, I'll lead off with you. Which one of these Baltimore Ravens running backs do you want to go with in week 2?
I'm going to go with Mark Ingram, and this might just be me trying to speak it into existence because I was a big proponent of Mark Ingram all throughout fantasy draft season. But look, last week, he actually got the majority of the touches. The difference was J.K. Dobbins ended up getting a couple of touches inside the 5. He had a couple of touchdowns. But when you look at their yardage totals, neither one of them was particularly great. I think, however, they do want to get to the run game a little bit more this week. I do think that Mark Ingram is still going to get the majority of the touches. Hopefully they give him some opportunities down near the goal line, winning if they get there. So I'm still holding on now. If this week it looks like more like J.K. Dobbins, I may have to rethink my strategy.
Now, though Ingram may have gotten the majority of touches, J.K. Dobbins led all the running backs in snaps and routes. He ran 14, while Ingram only ran 6, and Edwards had 2. This was kind of the fear that we all had coming into this season. We said, Mark Ingram, he's a little bit older for a running back. Now they have this young guy, J.K. Dobbins, and when you do that, sometimes those young guys get all of that volume, and that's what happened. He was the one who had all those red zones carries. He had 2 rushing touchdowns against that win over the Browns. I do think it's J.K. Dobbins this week, though I love Mark Ingram, and I want to speak it into existence as well. But if I got to give advice, it would be J.K. Dobbins over Mark Ingram.
The New England Patriots have been one of the toughest teams on fantasy wide receivers, but in 2 of the last 3 games, there has been at least one receiver that has scored at least 17 fantasy points against this squad. Obviously, Sunday night, they're going up against the Seattle Seahawks. Who do we think is going to be that receiver most likely to get that big point total this week?
I'm going to start here, and I think it's going to be it's going to be Tyler Lockett. Now, the reason for this is because of his relationship with Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson has 143.2 passer rating, targeting Lockett since 2018, which is the highest by any duo in the NFL. If we want to talk about those stacks on stacks, that quarterback receiver stack, it's going to be Tyler Lockett and Russell Wilson. So I'm all in on him this afternoon.
Absolutely. Lock it up. Lock it up this week with Tyler Lockett. I do think that he's a little bit more sure-handed too, right? Both of those guys, Metcalf and Lockett, had a lot of targets last week. DK had a couple of drops. That's not going to stop them from going or keep them from going away from him. But I do think Lockett is a little bit more sure-handed, and I think he has a little bit of a higher ceiling.
A couple of the reasons why I would prefer DK Metcalf, though, is that he led since the beginning of 2019. He is one of the leaders, if not the top leader, in end zone targets, which is huge. And if they put Stephon Gilmore on him, DK Metcalf is 3 inches taller. He's about 30 pounds heavier. I think that could be a huge mismatch. So I like DK this week, even though the numbers might not say that that is the case. Now, coming up. Yeah, that's right. It is time for our favorite tight end starts of the week. And by the way, should Zach Ertz managers be worried about Dallas Goedert? And our must-start sleepers for the week, that is NFL Fantasy Game Day rolls on. Here are my stardom tight ends for week 2. Obviously, I will say that Travis Kelce is a must-start. We got Jared Cook, Eric Ebron, who was a little bit of a fantasy disappointment last week, Evan Ingram, Dallas Goedert, Noah Fant. Those are some guys. I know Noah Fant's got a tough matchup, but I do believe that he's going to be targeted heavily in that game. And welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. And talking about tight ends, let's get into that situation with the Philadelphia Eagles. We saw Dallas Goedert come out and have a huge game. Which one of these tight ends would you prefer to play this week against the Rams? Marcus, let's start with you.
I'm going to go with Zach Ertz, mostly because, like I said at the top of the show, we think if things go one way, then the pendulum swings back the other way. If they stayed with Dallas Goedert 2 weeks in a row, then we would just think, hey, Dallas Goedert is the guy. But we need to have some turmoil and some conflict in our lives because that's just the way 2020 is. So this is the Zach Ertz week. I also just think that with having other guys healthy, that means the defense can't focus as much on Ertz like they did last week, and we know Carson Wentz likes to go in that direction. So I think just having more options, having Miles Sanders there will help Zach Ertz get open a little bit more and see some targets.
I 100% agree with you. I'm all in on Zach Ertz, and I kind of don't even like this slander. I understand that Dallas Goedert kind of had more time in that week 1 loss to the Washington football team. But guys, since 2018, Zach Ertz is the second-ranked fantasy tight end, scoring just under 16 fantasy points per game. So let's not be on the slander train. Let's wait for the week 2. Let's see how the performance shakes out. But I'm all in on Ertz this afternoon.
Well, I really do believe we've started to see Dallas Goedert try to establish himself in this offense going back to last season. And I think with the injury concerns that the Eagles have had, it's forced them to run that 12 personnel where they have to put 2 tight ends out on the field. And even though Zach Ertz is out snapping him by a little bit, Dallas Goedert is still a pretty viable option this week. And of course, if you're watching NFL Fantasy Live, MJD kind of alluded to the fact that perhaps, because Zach Ertz is their number 1 pass catcher, perhaps he could draw Jalen Ramsey this week. So that would be a little bit of a concern for me. Not enough to bench him, but it might give me an opportunity to get Dallas Goedert into our lineups. Now, it is time for Fantasy Insurance presented by Geico, and we're going to be talking about our top sleepers heading into week 2. And Kimmy, why don't you lead us off?
I want to talk about a guy who was earlier on your top 5 running back board. It's James Robinson, who plays for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now they're going up against the Tennessee Titans. He only had 10 fantasy points in week 1, which is ranking 34th amongst all running backs. But guys, he was an undrafted free agent, and this was a name who no one even considered in the preseason. At first, ahead of week 1, he was available in 99% of all NFL.com leagues. Then it went down to 71%, and those numbers are going to keep going up. He rushed 16 times for 62 yards in week 1 against the Colts. No other Jacksonville running back had a rush. He was the only one who did. So I think this is a sleeper to target moving forward.
Well, I'm going to look at Paris Campbell there with the Indianapolis Colts to see him last week against the Jaguars and what he did. This is a guy that's going to work out of the slot. We love speedy slot receivers who can get good yards after the catch. That is what Campbell can do. We saw Phillip Rivers working underneath quite a bit in week 1. And on top of it, the Vikings were gashed from the slot in week 1 when they faced the Green Bay Packers. So I think that this is all set up for Paris Campbell to have a pretty nice week for a passing game that was a little bit rocky in the first week.
I love both of those plays. And I also want to throw out Zach Moss this week for the Buffalo Bills. One of the things that you will be looking at in the future going up against the Miami Dolphins is that you're going to want to attack them through the middle. They're strong on the corners. And we saw it last week. Cam kind of gave him the game plan where your quarterback can run, your running backs can run. So I'm going to go with Zach Moss. Okay, savvy? All right, that was Fantasy Insurance presented by Geico. Now coming up, Wilson and Rodgers played very well in week 1, but was it a fluke? I mean, are these guys good or whatever? But could they have a 4-touchdown encore? We'll talk about that. Our experts will break it down. Plus, why TB12 is a must start today. Oh yeah. Now it's a week 2. Dak Prescott out there doing his thing. You're watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. There is Ben Roethlisberger. Last week, we predicted he would throw 3 touchdown passes in his debut in 2020 against the Denver Broncos. What will he do for an encore? Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day, presented by Geico. We are going to be answering some of those burning quarterback questions just like that here in this block. Let's talk about, though, 2 studs, Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson. Both those guys crushed in week 1, but which quarterback is more likely to throw 4 touchdowns this week? Kimmy, let's start with you.
I am all in on the Aaron Rodgers train. This is still his hold my beer Jordan Love season. He's still trying to remind everyone that he is an MVP worthy quarterback. He's had 24 career games with 4+ passing touchdowns. That's the 4th most in all time within the NFL. And 2 of those games out of the 24 with 4+ passing touchdowns have come against the Detroit Lions, who he's playing today. So I'm all in on Aaron Rodgers.
I do like the idea of the Aaron Rodgers petty party in 2020, but I also think that he throws 4 touchdowns, mostly because I fear the Lions secondary less than I fear the Patriots secondary. I just think it's a better matchup for Aaron Rodgers. He has a history of burning the Detroit Lions, so that's going to be part of it. Also, I think for the Seahawks, this might be a game where they might want to emphasize the run a little bit more after being so pass-heavy last week. I think they kind of want to go back to their roots and establish the run a little bit more. So I think we'll see less from Russell Wilson in week 2 than we did in week 1.
All right, we get it. Aaron Rodgers is fine. What about Tom Brady, though? Will he finish as a top 7 fantasy quarterback this week? Marcus, how do you feel?
I do. I think he will. Like I said, I think this is the week that Brady tries to remind everybody that he is not washed and that he's going to stiff-arm Father Time for another year. I don't know if this happens all season long, but I do think this week the matchup is favorable for him to do that against that young Panthers secondary that's still trying to figure some things out. I would especially believe it if Chris Godwin was there, but even with Mike Evans, Scotty Miller, whomever else he's throwing the football to, I think this is a week that Tom Brady comes back and smashes a little bit.
I like that. I mean, I'm all for Tom Brady. I mean, he's the GOAT. He's one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. But guys, he's only been a top 10 quarterback once in the last 11 weeks. Just because he's a good football player does not mean he is fantasy relevant. So I would like if he was a top 7 quarterback, but don't hold your breath and expect it.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me to see Rojo and Leonard Fournette get into the end zone this week. So I'm a little worried about Tom Brady from that perspective. But what about 2 quarterbacks who are disappointing in week 1? Carson Wentz, Jared Goff, they are squaring off today. Kimmy, which one of these quarterbacks is most likely to bounce back?
I'm going to go with Jared Goff, and a lot of this is also for the matchup against Carson Wentz. I do not want any part of Aaron Donald. We saw that they activated the backup quarterback today, and that's because Aaron Donald has a chance to go out there and absolutely smash Carson Wentz. Jared Goff, he had 275 passing yards, a 64.3 comp. So I don't know. I'm rooting for him. I want him to bounce back. I also think it's way better of a matchup.
I am 100% with you on that one, Kimmy. I'm about Goff this week. I said earlier, I think this will end up being more of a pass-heavy game for the Rams offense. I think they want to get Goff untracked after he didn't have a touchdown pass in week 1. And your fears about Aaron Donald going up against that Eagles offensive line, I think, are well-founded. After what Washington did to Carson Wentz last week, I worry that Aaron Donald's going to be in his face again all week this week. So I'm totally with you. I think Goff has the better game.
Yeah, you know what, though? When I saw Goff out there on the field warming up, he looks like the dude who walks around the gym and just talks to people, and then you never see him on any equipment. You're like, what's going on, bro? Are you going to lift? What's going on? You been trained, bro? All right, do we have some fan questions, Hytham? Is that what we're doing right now? Yeah, here we go. Francis wants to know, Mahomes or Rodgers versus Detroit? Kimmy, I want you to answer this one.
Oh, I hate this question, but I'm going to go with Aaron Rodgers again. I talked about it earlier when I was talking about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. The Kansas City Chiefs historically have not done so well against the Chargers. Obviously, don't sit Patrick Mahomes because it's Patrick Mahomes, but if you absolutely had to, I would do Aaron Rodgers.
All right, next question. Gardner Minshew or Goff in full Okay, I guess, are we worried about one of these quarterbacks catching a touchdown pass? Marcus, what do you think?
Yeah, it's PPR. You're not really worried about PPR for a quarterback. Look, I'm going to go with Goff here. I think I do think the Jaguars may try to run the football. Plus, the Jaguars don't have a ton of passing volume. It was nice that Minshew had all the touchdown passes. His yardage totals weren't great. So I think Goff is the guy who gets you more yards, gets you some decent numbers of touchdown. He's the guy I'd pick.
The NFL Fantasy app optimized Minshew into my lineup. Just throwing it out there. All right, in a 2-quarterback league, Dak, Deshaun Watson, or Phillip Rivers, which two do you start today? I'm just going to take this one. I'm going to say Dak is an obvious start for me. I had Phillip Rivers on my stardom board, but I still believe that you go back with Deshaun Watson just because of the running ability. Gives him such a nice floor. I know he could be running for his life because that offensive line didn't look so good, but I still think those are the two quarterbacks you're going to go with every week. Phillip Rivers can just start throwing YOLO balls at any time. They could run a lot to Jonathan Taylor. Now, still to come. It is going to be Sunday Fun Day. We're dishing out our top starts, sits, and more to get you a big win in week 2. You are watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. Time now for 15 minutes to kickoff, presented by Geico. Here are the list of notable actives and inactives. James Conner, Devontae Parker, Cortland Sutton, all starting this week. Phillip Lindsay, A.J. Brown, Chris Godwin, Kenny Golladay, and the big one, George Kittle will not play this week. Of course, earlier in the show, we talked about some viable options to start in their place. Logan Thomas, Kyle Rudolph. So make sure that your lineups are set and ready to go. You don't have one of those players in your lineup. And that was 15 minutes to kickoff, presented by Geico. And welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day, presented by Geico. Of course, there's Kimmy Chex, Marcus Grant, and we are welcoming to the show Michael F. Florio. But more importantly, we're welcoming that awesome shirt. Mike, how you doing?
I'm good. Nothing gets me more pumped up for week 2 of fantasy football than a nice floral shirt.
Well, nobody
Florio,
can...
wait, really quick. Someone tweeted me. I uploaded a picture of all of us ahead of today's show, and I said, join us, we're going to chat football. And someone tweeted me, and they said, your name is now Michael Florio. So that's what the F stands for. It's not Michael Fantasy Florio. It's Michael Florio.
You know what? I love floral shirts, and I approve of that message. And, Mike, you were sitting there. You were talking to all the fans this morning, especially on YouTube. What was the number one trending topic?
Yeah, a lot of people seem to be worried about Deshaun Watson this week. I understand why. The really tough matchup against the Ravens. Getting a ton of questions So players I said I would play over him are Josh Allen, Aaron Rodgers, Matt Ryan, and then some people I said I wouldn't start over him were Mitch Trubisky, Ryan Tannehill, Kirk Cousins, but a lot of people seem to be kind of stressing what to do with Deshaun Watson in this tough matchup.
What a world. Ryan Pace asking, hey, should I start Mitch over Deshaun Watson? But listen, we love hearing from you. We want to get a little bit of that action as well. So if you could, let's show a couple of the at NFL fantasy questions. Full point PPR question, DJ Chark or Corey Davis? Kimmy, which way are you leaning here?
DJ Chark. Now, I know he didn't have a crazy explosive week 1, but again, if you look at that Jacksonville offense, he really is one of the only weapons aside from James Robinson, so Chark all the way.
All right, Marcus, Todd Gurley or Miles Sanders?
I'm going to go Sanders in this one. I think he's going to be not as game script dependent as Gurley will be, and I think they're going to use Sanders in the short passing game to try and keep some of that Rams pressure off Carson Wentz.
And one more. Oh, we got two more, but Devontae Parker or Julian Edelman as a flex. Michael F. Florio. Where are you leaning?
I think I'm going to go with Julian Edelman here of the two. Devontae Parker, we saw him leave the game early last week, still dealing with that hamstring injury, and he has a really tough matchup against Trey White in the Bills secondary.
Yeah, good luck there, Banana. And one last one, David Johnson or Raheem Mostert. Oh, Florio, back me up. Mostert? I think Mostert makes the most sense there.
I like Mostert there as well, too.
Okay, good. I thought I was going to lead somebody astray. But in any event, all right, now it's time. Because, it's Sunday Funday! Boop, 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 boop. We still don't have the football music, but whatever. It doesn't matter. We want to know which player is going to pop off here in week 2. And Marcus, I'm going to let you lead us off. Who you got?
I'm going with Rain Dakota Prescott. He's going to make it rain fantasy points on the Atlanta Falcons this week. We saw what happened with the Falcons secondary against Russell Wilson and the Seahawks in week 1. I think Dak Prescott can do similar. Look, I like Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, but I think across the board, the Cowboys might have even better receiving weapons. So he's got that three-headed monster of the wide receivers. I think Dak Prescott has a huge day. I think he gets you over 30 points against the Falcons this week.
I love that, Marcus. I do think that this is the week where Dak Prescott pops, but another guy who's going to pop, this is no surprise. It's Lamar Jackson. I think if it's not going to be Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson is going to be the top scoring quarterback this week. He's going up against the Houston Texans. The Texans allowed 20 fantasy points to Patrick Mahomes in week 1. They've also allowed over 20 fantasy points against quarterbacks since 2019. That's the 6th most in the NFL. I don't even need to spew all the stats about how good Lamar Jackson is. You know it. Obviously, he's starting. It's going to be a huge game for him against the Texans.
Devontae Adams finished as the top fantasy scorer in week 1. I think he is going to repeat in week 2. Rank, you've been hyping up the Aaron Rodgers revenge tour. His right-hand man is Devontae Adams. He saw huge volume in week 1, has a strong matchup against the Lions secondary in week 2. I think he's going to keep the ball rolling and just explode once again in week 2.
Good call, good call. Now, if you knew me in high school or college, number one, you probably blocked me on Facebook already. But number 2, you knew that I like to take the answers of the smart people. So this goes back to something Kimmy was talking about earlier in the show. And Josh Allen is going to have a monster game against the Dolphins. And I think that Cam Newton gave him the cheat code last week. These quarterbacks are very similar. They love to run. They're their own goal line backs. They can also throw the football when they need to. Might not need to throw it this week as much as we saw what happened last week with Cam, who rushed for 75 yards and a pair of scores. But I really do believe this is a huge opportunity for Josh Allen. So sorry, Kimmy, I'm cheating off your paper. But what star – I'll go back to you, Kimmy, though. What star player are you worried about in week 2?
I'm actually really worried about Kansas City Chiefs, my homer team, but I'm worried about Tyreek Hill. Now, in the 2 games that he played against the Chargers in 2019, he had less than 5 fantasy points in those 2 games. For some reason, the Chargers are incredibly good against wide receivers. They've allowed 28 fantasy points per game to wide receivers since 2019, which is the 3rd fewest in the NFL. This is a really, really tough matchup. And then on top of that, Sammy Watkins got more targets, receptions, and yards than Tyreek in week 1. So though he's an incredible player, I think this is a really tough matchup, and I'm not too pumped about him scoring points today.
I'm worried about Melvin Gordon this week going up against that Pittsburgh Steelers defense. They made life absolutely miserable for Saquon Barkley in week 1. On top of that, look, we're not sure what's going to happen in that backfield between James Conner and Benny Snell. What could end up happening is just that Ben Roethlisberger throws the ball 40 to 45 times this week, turns this into a more up-tempo, high-scoring game, and then all of a sudden, if you're the Broncos, you've got to throw the football to try to keep up. That could potentially limit Melvin Gordon's effectiveness. I was hoping that maybe volume could be his friend, and maybe it still will, but it just feels like this could end up being a negative game script against a very good defense, and that concerns me.
I'm worried about Keenan Allen this week. He is a really tough matchup against a strong Chiefs secondary who really shut down wide receivers all of last year, and in week 1 they shut down everyone in the Texans offense not named Will Fuller. And Keenan last week, it was Mike Williams seeing all the volume, leading them in targets and air yards. So I'm not sure if Keenan is a great fit with Tyrod Taylor and on a tough matchup. It is just, for me, it's a lot to worry about in week 2 with which should be a star wide receiver.
Hey, Florio, you remember what happened the last time I doubted Keenan Allen? I don't want you to be, in a similar fate. I want to talk a little bit, though, about DJ Moore, who was a wide receiver I drafted 3rd, 4th round. And I'm a little concerned this week going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because that defense has really started to take hold. Going back to week 11 of last year, they have not allowed a 300-yard passer. So it's a concern for me. But at the same time, they're probably going to be in a deficit and have to throw the ball. So I'm going to get DJ Moore into my lineup. And I should just reiterate, too, as we're sitting here talking about these players who we're worried about, if you're in a standard, if you're in a home league, you're starting Tyreek Hill and DJ Moore and players like that. This is more DFS advice, but we're just worried about them. Don't get mad at us if Tyreek Hill goes out and has 100 yards or something. We're just telling you why we're concerned. Now let's move to the running back position. And who are some running backs that we want to start this week? And Florio, I will start with you.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Colts rookie runner Jonathan Taylor. Marlon Mack is now out for the year, and the Colts have already come out and said Taylor is going to be their starting running back. And the concern with him coming into the season was his passing game usage. Well, he caught all 6 of his targets in week 1, was nearly their leading receiver behind only Paris Campbell. I think there's big volume coming his way, and I am expecting him to take over as the goal line back as well, not expecting Naheem Hines to hold that role all year. I think Taylor has a big year, and I think it continues in week 2.
I love it. And if we want to talk about continued performances in week 2, I'm looking at Chris Carson. There was some concern over the preseason. Is he going to be healthy and be able to play? Well, he went out and was the 7th fantasy running back in week 1, 24.6 fantasy points, 6 rushes, 21 yards, 6 receptions, 45 yards, 2 tutties against the Atlanta Falcons. Now, the New England defense is tough, right? We all need to know that they only allowed 1 rushing touchdown allowed to all running backs in 2019, only 1, but they allowed 1 last week to Jordan Howard when they played the Dolphins. So I think there's opportunity for Chris Carson to shine and hopefully get some more red zone carries.
It was a surprise last week that Jonathan Taylor and Chris Carson caught the ball. It's not a surprise when David Johnson catches the ball, and I think that's what's going to help keep him afloat this week against Baltimore. On paper, the matchup is certainly very tough, but I think David Johnson is not going to be game scripted out of this one, regardless of what happens, because of what you see right there, him catching the football. Throw in the fact that Duke Johnson is not 100% in this one, so I do think we're going to see quite a bit of David Johnson in this one, and maybe he helps sort of take some of that pressure. Look, I know people are worried about Deshaun Watson. Florio mentioned it earlier. I think David Johnson being there maybe helps Deshaun Watson's case a little bit in week 2.
All right, you guys have convinced me. I'm starting David Johnson. I'm not afraid of it. And I wouldn't be too worried about playing DeAndre Swift this week either. I know we're going to show some. If you can show him dropping a touchdown pass, I think that would be warranted, even though, we're trying to show good performances. But I thought Adrian Peterson was very impressive last week. I think DeAndre Swift at some point is going to end up winning that role overall. So I think, and even this week, I think they're going to make a point to get him the football. Let's talk about the wide receiver position. Marcus, let's go with you.
I'm going to go Anthony Miller for the Chicago Bears, and he had a really nice game in week 1. I think he and Mitch Trubisky seem to work well together. Trubisky likes to throw to the slot. That's where Miller does a lot of his work. The Giants were beat up by slot receivers in week 1. Yes, I know that, obviously Mitch Trubisky and Ben Roethlisberger are 2 different quarterbacks, but I think that the opportunity is there. I like Allen Robinson as well. I actually like both of the Bears wide receivers in this matchup, but I'm especially thinking if you're hurting for a flex play right now, Anthony Miller's a good guy to fit into that slot.
All right, now another guy who's going to be good to fit in is Will Fuller. I know it's a really tough matchup. I know there's some concerns about Deshaun Watson going up against the Ravens, but Fuller was targeted all over the field on week 1 against the Kansas City Chiefs. 10 targets, 8 receptions, 112 yards. Obviously, Deshaun Watson is struggling without his star wide receiver, with him being gone and being traded to the Arizona Cardinals. So Will Fuller steps up. I think he's a must start, and I really hope he has a game against the Ravens.
Coming into the year, Calvin Ridley was a popular breakout pick. We saw why in week 1. 12 targets, 9 catches, 130 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And I expect more big numbers out of him this week in a game against the Cowboys that I think will be high scoring, and the Falcons could be chasing points.
Yeah, I love that. Love that play. I'm going to go with Deshaun Jackson, who last week was obviously a fantasy disappointment, but he led the NFL with over 200 air yards, which means they're going to try to stretch the field with him. Get the ball into his hands. I think some good things can happen this week. All right, let's take a look at some of the fan questions, though. I do want to get an opportunity to get those. Will Fuller, T.Y. Hilton, Florio, which way you leaning?
I'm going Will Fuller there this week. I know it's a tough matchup, but I think Fuller, he showed last week that matchup doesn't matter as long as he gets the volume.
All right, next. Benny Snell or Joshua Kelly? Kimmy, I'm going to go to you. You like Benny Snell earlier in the show. How do you feel about this one?
I talked about it earlier. I'm still on the Benny Snell train. Get him in your lineup.
All right, next. Hayden Hurst, Jonnu Smith, the tight end Marcus. Which way are you going?
I think I'm going to go Hayden Hurst in this one. I know he was a disappointment last week, but I think they try to get him involved. Plus, at the Titans, they have like 2 or 3 tight ends they seem to use in their offense.
I know that Matt Leinart was asking earlier today if he should go Hawkinson or Hurst. I said Hawkinson. I feel like I'm ruining his morning already. And, by the way, Matt Leinart is a huge fan of the hype train. So, thank you so much for watching NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. Good luck.